This is Soulzen Wellness. If you've ever been told it's all in your head, even though you know something is wrong, this video is for you. We're going to break down the science behind that gut feeling and prove that your intuition isn't just anxiety.
Today, we're diving into the science behind intuition and how that little voice in your head, that nagging feeling that something is off with your health, well, it might just be the most important medical data you have. You know the feeling, right? It's so frustrating. You go to the doctor, you do all the tests, and on paper, everything looks fine. But you just can't shake that sense, that deep down intuition that something is not right. So this is what we're exploring today. A pretty radical idea when you think about it. What if your personal experience, your story of feeling unwell, isn't just, noise to be ignored? What if it's a crucial signal that science is finally learning how to decode? Okay, so how do you even begin to translate a vague sensation into something a doctor can actually use? Well, the process starts with a really cool concept known as pattern mapping.
Pattern mapping is basically a method for listening to the earliest whispers of an illness. It hones in on what's called the pre-pathological state. That's the period before a disease actually shows up on a test, but when your body is already sending out these subtle signals that really only you can feel.
And this is not just some theory. A huge moment for this idea was the Cologne Early Recognition Study back in the early 2000s. See, instead of only looking at standard clinical symptoms, researchers started paying really close attention to the unique and often very personal ways patients were describing these small changes in how they felt. The results were just stunning. By tracking not just symptoms, but the very specific phrases people use to describe their inner world, they could actually predict who was going to develop a serious condition like schizophrenia with incredible accuracy, years before a formal diagnosis was even possible.
And the data they were mapping, it wasn't clinical at all. It was things like, my thoughts feel slippery, or the world looks too bright. Some people just described this profound feeling of wrongness. These almost poetic, deeply personal phrases turned out to be unbelievably powerful clues.
And this brings us to a really powerful way to think about this, the symptom iceberg. What a doctor can see and measure, the diagnosis, that's just the tiny tip sticking out of the water. Beneath the surface, there's this huge, invisible reality of all those sensations, the full story of what a person is actually going through.
Right. But for this kind of data to be taken seriously, medicine needs a way to think about it, a framework for valuing it. And that's where a field called Phenomenological medicine comes into the picture.
So what this approach basically says is that to really understand health, we have to prioritize the patient's actual lived first-person experience. Instead of just seeing a person as a collection of biological parts that can break, it tries to understand their subjective world.
So this is the key difference right here, the distinction between disease and illness. A disease is the doctor's view. It's the biological problem, the objective lab result. It's a third-person view. But an illness, that's the patient's view. That's the first-person lived experience, the subjective feelings, the story of how that disease is actually impacting your life. For way too long, medicine has only really focused on one side of this chart.
And this way of thinking completely reframes the doctor-patient relationship. It's not just about diagnosing a technical problem anymore. It becomes an active interpretation, where the doctor's job is to build a bridge between their scientific world and the patient's unique personal world.
Okay, but let's be realistic. Collecting and interpreting millions of individual stories is a massive job. I mean, how could we possibly find the hidden patterns in all that data at scale? Well, this is where a seriously powerful new tool comes in, artificial intelligence.
One of the key ideas here is a framework called pattern recognition. It's an AI model, and its superpower is finding the best match between all of that fuzzy data, your feelings, your sensations, and the known patterns of different diseases.
And this type of AI is just perfect for this kind of job because it loves the fuzzy, messy data of human experience. It uses something called information compression, which is just a fancy way of saying it's really good at finding the simplest, most important signal inside a whole lot of noise. This means it can handle messy data and, best of all, it learns and gets smarter over time.
So here's a simple breakdown of how it might work. First, all the data gets fed in. Your lab results, but also your descriptions, your feelings, your whole story. Next, the AI pulls out what it thinks are the most important features. Then comes the really cool part, pattern matching. It compares your unique profile to its massive library of disease patterns.
So, when you put all of this together, the philosophy, the data, the AI, what does it all mean?
Well, it points to a really fundamental shift in the future of how we practice medicine.
Here's the whole game changer. The goal is to shift medicine from being reactive to being predictive. By taking these intuitive reports from patients and treating them like real data, we can move away from only treating diseases after they've already shown up to actually stepping in during that pre-pathological state before you even get truly sick.
And just so we're clear, this is not science fiction. There's active research, like this paper right here from J. Gerard Wolff, that's building the foundation to make this a reality, to actually integrate this kind of AI-powered pattern recognition into the tools that doctors use every single day.
So, the big takeaway here is pretty powerful. When you combine a philosophy that actually values a patient's experience with the incredible power of AI that can analyze it, you get a whole new kind of medicine. One that can finally learn to read the story your body is telling you long before the final chapter is written.
Which leaves us with this one last big question to think about. What could medicine really achieve if our stories were treated just as seriously as our lab results? It points to a future where your intuition isn't just a feeling. It's the first, and maybe the most important, line of defense for your health.